cavities in their teeth. They had dental abscesses. And actually, when we do autopsies or when we do CAT scans or MRI scans on the Egyptian mummies, they had terrible heart disease. And the diet that they were eating is actually the diet that the American Heart Association recommends, which is a diet high in whole grains. And keep in mind, the Egyptians didn't eat modern GMO wheat, right? They ate the ancient emmer wheat, which a lot of health gurus will say, well, you know, it's this GMO wheat. It's not.
Hi, everyone. It's Doc M. It's your champion of well-being, and welcome to another episode of The Edge, the series where we explore conversations around well-being, performance, and longevity. I'm very fortunate to have a very, very well-known American physician with us on the show. He joins us live from the USA, and he's the author of the book, and we're going to be having a lot of conversations around diet. That's going to be a central theme of today's conversation. Dr. Ken Berry, he's a board-certified family physician and fellow in the American Academy of Family Physicians. He's the author of the best-selling book, and I love the title of this. I can't wait to get into this. The Lies My Doctor Told Me, which exposes myths and misleading health advice from well-meaning doctors themselves. He is currently in Camden, Tennessee, and affiliated with the Henry County Medical Center. Dr. Ken Berry, welcome to The Edge. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure to do so. And a question I ask all my guests on the show, given that we're doing this in lockdown, is where are you in the world?
I am in a very small town in Midwestern Tennessee in the U.S. We have a small farm here. We raise lots of different farm animals, and we try to just stay on the farm as much as possible. That seems the safest option.
Makes sense. Absolutely. So look, there's so many things that I want to deep dive into. Of course, the books that you've written, the experiences that you have as a practicing clinician, and so many overlaps with our sort of philosophies around that. And I want to really start with PhD, the proper human diet. It's clearly something which you're very passionate about. Firstly, before we dive into it, can you tell us a little bit about what exactly PhD really means and the philosophy behind it?
So there are many diets that a human being can eat and not die. And so I think there are various levels of goals for the diet that you eat. If you're trying not to starve to death, right, then you should eat whatever you can get your hands on, because the goal in that situation is not to die of starvation. But if we move up kind of, Maslow's hierarchy, and we come to a point where we're in no danger of starving, then the goal becomes, what food should I eat to optimize my health, right, and my longevity? And so that's where the concept of a proper human diet came from. If you're at risk of starvation, then you should eat all the sugar and all the grains and all the vegetable oils and all the other crap that the big food manufacturers put out, because that will protect you from starvation. There's no doubt about that. But if your goal is to optimize your mental health, your physical health, your longevity, your lifespan, and your health span, if those are your goals, then you should definitely not eat those things. You should try to mimic as closely as possible the diet that we have eaten for 99% of our time on planet Earth. And it did not contain any of those starvation foods. When we had our choice, we always ate a diet that was very rich and full of fatty meat, whether that was seafood, whether that was poultry, whether that was red meat, ruminant meat. That was always our go-to. And indeed, paleoanthropological research makes it very clear that human beings were super carnivores for 95% of our time on this planet, meaning that our diet consisted of at least 70% meat. And of course, we ate plants. Of course, we ate fruits and berries and vegetables and even grains in starvation conditions. But if food was plenty, we always opted for fatty meat. And so I think a proper human diet is full of fatty meat, at least to some portion. And if you have some proclivity or some repulsion to certain kinds of meat, there are many different options on the animal-based menu. I think every bite of food, if you're trying to optimize yourself, should be nutrient dense, right? And this doesn't mean fortified with a few chemical vitamins or minerals that were made in a chemical factory. This means eating human appropriate, ancestrally appropriate food that's rich in vitamins and minerals and fatty acids and amino acids. Those are the things that you need to build and repair your body. And, and so a lot of it goes back to just the common sense proposition that there are specific diets for different species of mammal. And if we look at the felines, if we look at just the common house cat, it is a carnivore. There is no argument about that in veterinary science. Well, actually, there is, because it's become very mainstream to say that a cat should eat a plant-based diet, which is foolishness. You're ignoring all of the ancestral heritage of the feline line and saying it's okay for your cat to eat a plant-based diet. But that's foolishness. And in that same regard, I think it's foolish to say that a human diet should be full of starvation foods like grains and sugars, when in fact that in no way optimizes human performance or human health.
Very, very interesting. And we're going to deep dive into the meat aspect later on in the show. It seems to me that there were three things that you were suggesting we don't eat, which was grain, sugar, and seed oil. And what I found fascinating actually about reading your work was this idea about seed oil. I think it's not as understood or not well as appreciated as grain and sugar, at least in mainstream conversations and media. Could you help our viewers understand why seed oil is bad and what are some of the places that you may find it in?
Yes. First of all, let me say, you can cut this out. I'm getting some kind of staticky feedback coming from your end. I don't know if it's you're moving and touching the mic, or I don't know what's going on, but
is it constant?
No, it's not constant. It looks like it's associated with your movement. It looks like it's static when you move, but I'm not sure. But keep an eye on it on your end. So the question is, why do I vilify vegetable seed oils? And again, what we're trying to do, and I don't think anybody really has an argument with the common sense proposition that we should eat the diet that mimics our ancestors for the majority of their time on this planet. And in that respect, that's where my vilification of vegetable seed oils comes from. For 95% of our existence on this planet, our fats came predominantly from animal sources. We ate the fat from the animal. When we did start to cook, we used the fat from animals to cook with. Only in the last 100 years have human beings eaten vegetable seed oils in any meaningful quantity. So really before the early 1900s, humans never ate seed oils with any regularity in any percentage of their diet. So this is something. So, it's my opinion that anytime we start a new food or a new medicine, before we claim that it's safe and healthy, we should do long-term control studies in humans. And so back in the 1910s and before, when Crisco started to sell cottonseed oil that had formerly been a lubricant and a waste product, when they started to sell that for human consumption, I think before that was ever allowed, we should have done long-term controlled trials in humans to say, wait a minute, when humans have never eaten cottonseed oil, so that's obviously a new thing in the human diet. It's made in a chemical factory. We should probably study that and make sure that that's not dangerous. And I think we've established that it's not acutely toxic for human beings, just with the experiment that's been done on the general population. It's not going to kill you today or tomorrow. But what are the long-term ramifications of eating cottonseed oil? And in that same respect comes soybean oil, comes canola oil, comes sunflower, safflower, peanut oil. All of these oils, we never ate them in any percentage that would be considered meaningful as a portion of our human diet. Yet now, without any research showing that they are safe in the long term, we're now told these are heart healthy by our American Heart Association. We're told to avoid animal fats, which is what we have eaten for our entire existence on the planet. And we should only eat vegetable oils. And so I think that's a bad choice. And I think we see that in the chronic inappropriate inflammation that is present in the majority of adults who live in modern society. I think it may play an intimate role in the development of heart disease and many other medical problems. And so the problem is no one ever thought maybe we should research this before we start putting this in the mouth of every human being. But no one thought to do that. And so now we're stuck with this heritage of eating vegetable seed oils for the last several decades. And nobody really knows if it's safe or not. And so out of an abundance of caution, I would recommend that human beings eat fats that come from sources that we've eaten for 95% of our time on this planet until the controlled research is done, the long-term studies are done to show that the high omega-6s that are found in vegetable seed oils are safe for long-term consumption in human beings. We just don't know if that's true yet or not. And so I would advise people to avoid them until it's been proven safe for the long term.
So on a similar thread, then let's talk a little bit about grain-free. A lot of our viewers would be familiar with gluten-free diets, and even if you suffer from celiac disease, the importance of staying away from gluten. You're an advocate of grain-free diets for similar sorts of ideas and trends. Would you elaborate a little bit on that as well?
Yeah. So grains are the seeds of grasses, right? And plants don't have claws or fangs or venom. They can't keep you from eating their babies, which that's what their seeds are. And they can't protect them physically, so they protect them chemically. Every grain has anti-nutrients in it. It has chemicals that are put there specifically to keep other animals from eating those seeds. And so most people know about gluten and gliadin and wheat, but there are many, every grain has these phytochemicals that are put there for the express purpose of preventing other animals from eating those seeds. So therefore, we should probably avoid those. Now, I think that there are people out there who can eat grains in moderation and seemingly have no health or mental or physical health consequences of that. I think and so there's a bell curve for every single thing about human physiology. So some people fall on the end of the bell curve where they can eat grains and it doesn't really seem to bother them. Other people, if they eat any grains whatsoever, they have immediate feedback from their body that was a wrong choice, that they should not do that. And so also, grains do contain some vitamins. They do contain some minerals. They do contain a few of the amino acids. But the phytates and the lectins and other things found in plant foods very often bind up the vitamins and minerals so that we don't even have access to them. And so they pass through your system. And although you ate some iron or you ate some this vitamin or that vitamin or this mineral, you didn't actually have any benefit from it because it was bound up by these phytochemicals and passed right through your system. And so if you look at what you ate, it looks like you're eating a vitamin and mineral rich diet. But if you look at what you are actually able to absorb, you didn't get the benefit of any of that zinc or any of whatever you want to talk about. You didn't get the benefit of that. So it's like you never ate it. And that's not the truth. That's not the case with animal-based foods. The vitamins and minerals are readily accessible. All of the amino acids are there, and you can use them immediately to improve your health and rebuild your body tissue. And so there are many problems with grain. If we look back at ancient Egyptian culture, in Egypt, unless you were a prisoner or a pauper, you got mummified to some degree. They believed that you had to be mummified in order to cross to the promised land. That's my vernacular, not theirs. But they believed that would hamper your journey in the afterlife if you weren't mummified. So everyone got mummified. And we have access to literally thousands of these mummies. Now, Egyptians didn't have added sugar. That hadn't been invented yet, right? But they were known as the bread people. That's what other cultures called them. And if you look at their day-to-day statues, they very commonly had man boobs and belly pooch. It was very common in Egyptian society. They also had terrible cavities in their teeth. They had dental abscesses. And actually, when we do autopsies or when we do CAT scans or MRI scans on the Egyptian mummies, they had terrible heart disease. And the diet that they were eating is actually the diet that the American Heart Association recommends, which is a diet high in whole grains. And keep in mind, the Egyptians didn't eat modern GMO wheat, right? They ate the ancient emmer wheat, which a lot of health gurus will say, well, you know, it's this GMO wheat. It's not wheat itself. Well, actually, the Egyptians were eating a sugar-free diet and lots of ancient non-GMO wheat. And they had terrible heart disease. Their coronary artery calcium scores were terrible, even in their 30s and 40s. And so they ate lots of whole wheat. That was the majority of their diet. They ate lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, a little bit of poultry, almost no red meat whatsoever. And that was their diet. And yet no one, if they actually knew the truth, would want the health of the average Egyptian. Nobody wants to have man boobs and a belly pooch. No one wants to have terrible cavities in their teeth. No one wants to have severe heart disease starting in their 30s and 40s. That's what a wheat-based diet gives you. And so when we look at other cultures that ate an animal-based or a meat-based diet and didn't have access to grains, their arteries are squeaky clean. And so it really makes you wonder, is this diet that's being promoted by the powers that be today, is it a starvation diet or is it a proper human diet? Because I would say that it's the former and not the latter.
One of the history and vilification of fats, all of us went to med school many years ago. Remember the fact that, you know, they used to say carbohydrate diets are good and fats are generally bad. Professor Tim Noakes on the show, and he was, of course, someone who spoke very openly about carbohydrates and then switched across later on in his career. As we look at fats and the importance that it has in our bodies, I think it's important for our viewers to appreciate the difference between good fat and bad fat. Would you be able to help us understand the difference and the constituents of each, please?
I can certainly try. So good fats are fats that are naturally occurring. I think that it would be hard for anyone to argue with that. What fats that we should avoid are fats that are made in chemical factories that contain detergents and deodorizers and oxidizers and bleaches to get the brown, nasty looking color out of them. That's where canola oil comes from and soybean oil. That's where peanut oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, that's how they're made. You can't step on a bunch of canola seeds and oil come out. Now, some plant-based oils I think are probably fine because you can make them over a campfire or on your kitchen stove. And those include coconut oil, avocado oil, and olive oil, right? Human beings have been making those over their campfire, over their stove at home for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I think those are probably less bad. The fat found in animal fats is a perfect blend of monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated fats, right? Most people are falsely deluded into believing that animal fats are just saturated fats. And that's just not true at all. Some of the fattiest animal foods you can eat, the most prominent fat in that animal fat is monounsaturated fatty acid. And it's usually oleic acid, which oleic that comes from olives, right? And so the oil that we're told is so healthy in olive oil, oleic acid, is actually the predominant fatty acid found in many animal fats. It's much more prominent than saturated fat, right? And one of the major problems with polyunsaturated fats, in my opinion, is that modern society eats too much polyunsaturated fat or PUFAs. a lot of people call them. And so our ancestral diet looked like that it was a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 ratio of omega-3 fatty acids versus omega-6 fatty acids. But if you look at the diet in a modern population, their omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is 20-to-1, 30-to-1. So it's not that polyunsaturated fats in the proper amount are bad, because there indeed are polyunsaturated fats that are essential. You have to have some, but you can get them in the perfect proportion from fatty meat. When you start eating concentrated, chemically produced vegetable seed oils, you're getting a 20-to-1, 10-to-1, 30-to-1, in some cases, even a 50-to-1 ratio of the polyunsaturated fatty acids to the omega-6 fatty acids to the omega-3 fatty acids. And that is an unhealthy ratio. And I think that leads to much of the chronic inappropriate inflammation that we see in modern societies.
With animal-based products, dairy is another ingredient that often causes a little bit of confusion. You're very beautifully right about the bent nature of proteins when it comes to dairy as it gets to cheese. And of course, a lot of our viewers here in India would be consuming ghee, which is a very healthy form of oil. Would you be able to share with us what you mean by bent nature and how exactly dairy does become beneficial for human consumption?
Yeah. So I think in infant mammals, that's who milk is for, right? And I really think that species-specific milk is without a doubt the proper milk for that individual. And so when we're talking about human babies, infants, up to about the age of 4, 5, or 6, they need human milk. That's what they need. Now, if they are unable to access human milk, then bovine milk or caprine milk, I think, is a tolerable replacement. And so many babies do great on goat milk. They don't do that great on cow's milk. There are different proteins in the milks that can be very inflammatory, even to some children, unless it's a species appropriate milk. And so up until the age of 4, 5, or 6 years of age, I think it's perfectly ancestrally appropriate and part of a proper human diet for a human to drink liquid milk. But after that age, as you know, a lot of Americans don't realize this, but over 2/3 of the world's population is lactose intolerant. After the age of 4, 5, or 6, if they drink milk in liquid form, they develop immediate symptoms. But here in the U.S., it seems it's just everyone drinks milk. That's normal, but it's not normal for the majority of the world population. And so I think that fact alone ought to raise a red flag should any of us be drinking milk, because indeed what we find is that many people of Caucasian descent, although seemingly they can drink milk without any gastrointestinal problems, but they wind up with rosacea or eczema or psoriasis, right? They wind up, or with joint pain or with some lower gut symptom that they don't readily associate with the liquid dairy. And so dairy is made up of 3 components. It's made up of carbohydrates, it's made up of fat, and it's made up of protein, just like any other food you would eat or drink. And so I don't think the fat part of dairy is really bad at all. And if you can separate it from the protein and carbohydrates, I think that it's perfectly fine for human beings to use that. So butter and ghee, I think, are amazingly healthy, nutrient-dense fats that human beings can use and should use. But the carbohydrates in milk, the lactose that's made up of glucose and galactose, is far too high in carbohydrate, far too high in sugar for human consumption, especially after the age of about 5 or 6. You're gonna start storing fat if you drink that many carbohydrates on a daily basis. Now, the protein macronutrient of milk. So if you're drinking liquid milk, these are foreign proteins. These come from other species, right? And they are tailor-made for that specific species. Many humans have a problem with chronic inflammation if they drink the protein from liquid milk. But when you put the milk under the power of a microbe, and you turn that milk into yogurt or kefir or cheese, the molecule actually bends and reforms. And for many people, that makes the protein molecules in the milk much less inflammatory. Now, I don't opine that it makes them 100% a part of a proper human diet, but I think it makes them much less inflammatory and much less bad to have dairy in that form of cheese or yogurt or kefir or any of the other things that you can use a bacteria or a yeast to modify and bend the protein found in the milk.
As I was looking at the website, you speak about your war against insulin-resistant diabetes, pre-diabetes, problem in the Western world, but even somewhere in India, we have, these exploding numbers as 35-40% of people are pre-diabetic, and maybe more. What is interesting is the relationship between sleep and the incidence and development of diabetes. And I'd love to understand from your experiences what you've seen between the two and how physiologically that can make an impact on a patient's progression of disease.
I think sleep does have some effect, some negative effect on metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia. But I think we should never misconstrue a 1 or 2% solution for an 80 or 90% solution. So I do think sleep is important for hundreds of different things when it comes to human optimization. But the diet you eat on a daily basis, that's 80 or 90% of the battle. So what I mean by that is you can get the best sleep possible. You can sleep optimally. And if you're eating a high carbohydrate inflammatory diet, you're still at very, very high risk of developing prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia. And you know as well as I do that some genetic populations fatten much more easily than others. And so someone with my DNA will tend to, if we're eating a high carbohydrate diet, drinking lots of carbohydrates, I'm going to get fat. And indeed I was. I weighed 297 pounds when I started this journey. But whereas someone of Indian descent, with that specific DNA, it's very hard for them to fatten. They might develop a little bit of central adiposity, a little belly pooch, but they won't necessarily get fat. And my worry about the Indian population is that we know that the diabetes is epidemic. But what I'm afraid of is that since Indians don't fatten as readily as Caucasians and Nordics, right, Scotch Irish, that there is a huge percentage of undiagnosed prediabetes and type 2 diabetes in the Indian population because the doctor doesn't think to check because they look relatively slender, relatively healthy, right? And unless they're having symptoms of prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, the doctor's not going to check the needed lab work. And that's why I always try to tell people, if you're over the age of 35 or 40, you need to have a hemoglobin A1C checked. That's going to tell you if you're a pre-diabetic or a type 2 diabetic, even if you don't have a single diabetic symptom. After the age of 35 or 40, you need that test checked probably once a year. The second test is a C-peptide. When your pancreas is making insulin, it makes one molecule of C-peptide for every molecule of insulin, and then they break apart. Insulin does its job, and then C-peptide goes by the wayside. So it is an excellent proxy marker for hyperinsulinemia, which in my opinion is the very first marker of insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, and prediabetes. And so every human being on the planet after the age of 35 or 40 needs to have their C-peptide checked annually, if not, maybe once every 5 years if your doctor just refuses to do it annually. But if your C-peptide is elevated, then you are suffering damage from the high carbohydrate diet that you're eating, even if you're still slender. Even if you don't think you're a type 2 diabetic, you are moving in that direction.
Absolutely. I think it's very important. About 8 or 9 months ago, after I had COVID, steroids, my HbA1c climbed up fairly high, even though I'm a relatively young and very fit person. So I've been wearing this continuous glucose monitor on my arm, and it's incredible the insights that such a simple device can show us with our food and diet. In your clinical practice, do you use the CGM device? And if so, what have been your experiences of that?
Yeah, I think a continuous glucose monitor is just one of the best tools that someone can use if they're concerned about their metabolic health. Here in the United States, currently, you have to have a prescription from your doctor in order to get a continuous glucose monitor. In Canada, no prescription is needed. Now, in both countries, it's very expensive to get a continuous glucose monitor. I'm not sure of the cost and if you need a prescription or not in India, but you maybe could speak to that. But basically, wearing a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks or 4 weeks gives you a nutritionist level of education of what foods do to your body. And I think that's the most powerful lesson you learn from it, because not all of us respond to different carbohydrates in the same manner. Some of us, if we eat potatoes, our blood sugar will go sky high. Whereas if we eat another carbohydrate, our blood sugar doesn't really elevate that much. There's all this variability in people. But if they can see on their cell phone, and so the CGM hooks up to your cell phone, and so you can get a minute by minute report of what your blood sugar is doing. And so when you sit down to a traditional meal of rice and vegetables, you can watch your blood sugar minute to minute after that meal. And if you have a very high blood sugar excursion, that tells you immediate feedback: I ate too many carbohydrates in that meal. I need to eat fewer carbohydrates the next meal. And so since we're back to, there's only 3 macronutrients, there's protein, fat, and carbohydrates, right? If you ate too many carbohydrates in that meal, then you need to lower the carbohydrates. And by definition, you've got to raise the fat and raise the protein so that you're still eating enough food so that you're not hungry all the time. So I'm a huge fan and proponent of continuous glucose monitors. And I think everybody who can afford one should get one immediately. And then when you're finished with it, you can actually pass it on to a friend or a family member. They can buy their own sensors and continue to use that glucose monitor. So one glucose monitor like that can help an entire family. And even if you have to pool your resources to be able to buy one, I think it is an excellent investment for a family to get a continuous glucose monitor.
No, absolutely. And I was just looking at the phone, and for people who are watching the video, you may be able to see that you can look at the charting of my glucose in real time. We'll make sure that the link for anyone who's interested in finding out how they may be able to get one, particularly in India. Actually relatively easy now. It doesn't require a doctor's prescription. We had Michael Snyder on the show a few weeks ago, precision medicine doctor, and does a lot of work in human data myself. And he raised a really interesting point, which is that different metabolisms respond to the same food in different ways. And so for him, eating, a particular meal, particular type of pasta responded very, very differently than how his wife was responding. And that's why I think these devices just show so much. Dr. Ken, if I may follow on this thread about carbohydrates and diabetes, as one tries to migrate to a low carbohydrate meal, low carbohydrate diet, on the energy side, quite often people complain that their sort of energy goes up or drops and they have these low points, etc. What have you seen in your clinical practice around this, and what should people be aware of as they sort of transition into the slightly different way of eating?
Yeah, again, I see a bell curve distribution of this phenomenon. Some people, when they start eating a low carbohydrate diet full of fatty meat, they immediately start to feel better, have more energy, more mental clarity. And then on the other side of the curve, I have a subset of the population who go through what I call carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. Carbohydrates, especially highly processed carbohydrates, stimulate the same portions of the brain, the pleasure centers of your brain, that are stimulated by illicit drugs. And we have many PET scan images that prove that without doubt. And so I think there is a subset of the population that becomes addicted to highly processed carbohydrates and definitely to high carbohydrate, easy to eat, easy to absorb foods. And they have to break that addiction. And that's going to take from 3 to 10 days. And they're going to have the same sorts of symptoms as someone who is abstaining from alcohol or from tobacco. If you look up the withdrawal symptoms for alcohol or tobacco, they're almost exactly the same as the symptoms that people report and call the keto flu or the low-carb flu or the Atkins flu. It's the same. It's the same kind of thing. That's the first thing. And then the second thing that comes is that it takes a few weeks to become fully fat adapted, right? Where you can burn the fats for fuel. Your body has the machinery, but it seems that in some people, it takes a few weeks for that machinery to ramp back up and to really begin to fuel your body. The third thing is that when you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, you tend to hold more fluid. And in that fluid are electrolytes, right? And that's just how the human body stores fluid. And then when you start to eat a low carbohydrate diet and your insulin levels return to normal, you're going to have a diuresis. Right? And so you're going to urinate away this excess unhealthy fluid that you've been holding on your high carbohydrate diet. And people will urinate away anywhere from 3 to 25 pounds of unhealthy water that they were storing in their body. The way the human kidney works is you can't urinate just pure water. There has to be electrolytes in that for the kidney to function properly. And so when you start a low carbohydrate diet, you're going to lose some of this unhealthy fluid, which is a good thing. But with that fluid is going to go sodium and chloride and magnesium and potassium. And so many people use some sort of electrolyte supplement to replace those electrolytes. And that seems to help the symptoms of converting to a low carbohydrate diet. Many people report complete remission of any of those symptoms when they're using an electrolyte supplement. And there are many good ones on the market. I'm not going to name a brand, but I think that those three things are why some people suffer for a few weeks when they're transitioning from a high carb diet to a low carb diet. Some people have to become fat adapted, which takes a while. Some people have to replace their electrolytes, and some people have to go through carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms and break that addiction before they're able to feel their best on a low carbohydrate diet.
Very helpful. Very descriptive as well. Thank you. We've spent a lot of time talking about the food side of the equation. Perhaps it's a good opportunity for us to talk a little bit and exercise and the importance that has in our lives as well. What sort of routines do you suggest to your patients and how do you work with that?
So exercise is vital for optimal human performance, both physically and mentally. There's ample research showing that daily vigorous exercise protects you from dementia, protects you from depression, lots of different things that exercise does for the human body. There's no doubt about that. Again, sleep, very important for optimal human function. Good quality, deep, restful, restorative sleep is mandatory if you want to live to be an old, healthy, wise adult, right? I think sun exposure is vital, maybe as vital as good sleep. Going out for a 5 or 10 minute walk in the sun every morning to reset your circadian rhythm, to reset your biological clock, I think is vital. You need the vitamin D that your skin produces from cholesterol when exposed to sunlight. You need the nitric oxide that your skin produces when exposed to sunlight. And I guarantee you there are other things that the skin produces and does when it's exposed to sunlight that's good for human beings. We just don't have the research to prove it yet. I think stress management is vital if you're going to be your best version of you. There are many hacks and tricks and strategies to help people control stress. But as you and I both know, when you're in the middle of a stressful situation, it's hard to talk about stress management. When you're in the middle of the storm, that's not really that high on your menu. And so it's easy to talk about, but it's hard for some people to actually take charge of their stress in their life. So all those things definitely matter. But when we talk about insulin resistance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, obesity, fatty liver, if you're not focusing 90% of your effort on your diet, then you're gonna miss out on the benefits, because all those other things, sleep, sun exposure, stress management, exercise, are very important to be the best you that you can be. But if you're ignoring your diet and focusing on all those things, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, I think you just raised NAFL, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and particularly in India, as you were saying, and South Asia generally, where you have sick, thin people. Would you mind explaining to our viewers the relevance of visceral fat? Because we're also obsessed with the aesthetic subcutaneous versions, but actually that visceral fat is the dangerous one.
Yeah, visceral fat is the fat that you hold inside your abdomen, underneath your abdominal muscles. And indeed, if your diet is high carbohydrate enough, your body will actually store fat inappropriately in your liver and in your pancreas and in your kidneys. And these things don't get talked about nearly as much as they should. They're very, very important. So if we look at the evolution of Homo sapiens sapien, which you're one of, subcutaneous fat, the fat that we hold on our butt and our thighs and our belly, that was actually a very good thing 100,000 years ago. That we considered that insurance. So we would store 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds in times of plenty, so that when we reached a famine stage, which happened very often back then, we had that fat that we could burn as fuel and not starve to death. And that was actually a very good thing. Now in modern society, where it's never winter, right? There's never a famine, at least for the majority of us, holding that excess fat under our skin, it's not visually appealing. We don't like it. It makes us not look good in our swimsuit. And so we want to get rid of that. And I understand that. But people need to understand that human beings are, by design, we're the fattest primates of all the primates, especially our babies. Our babies should be fat. That's actually a very protective thing. And then even as adults, human males should hold somewhere between 10 and 20% body fat. That looks like that's the sweet spot for optimal health. Female humans should hold anywhere from 15 to 25% body fat. If they get much below that, they start to not have problems with their menstrual cycle and their ability to get pregnant. And I think that's a huge red flag. You're not doing something right if you stop having a period, right? There's something drastically wrong in either your food environment or your overall environment. And so when you are eating a high carbohydrate diet that's high enough that you start to store inappropriate fat in your liver and your pancreas and your kidneys, it's very, very dangerous. There's copious amounts of research showing that your risk of heart attack, stroke, liver failure, hepatitis, kidney failure, type 2 diabetes, they actually skyrocket when you're holding fat in your liver and your pancreas and your kidneys. But you can have a very unhealthy amount of fat in your liver and pancreas, but still look outwardly to be very slim. And this is, in fact, the danger of the vast majority of the Asian population and the Indian population, is that they don't fatten easily. And so they can have severe fatty liver, which is, the name is actually being changed to MAFLD, metabolic associated fatty liver disease, because it's foolish to call it what it's not, non-alcoholic. Well, okay, but what is it? And so a lot of people in that research area are saying, let's call it metabolic associated fatty liver disease, because that immediately tells you what it is, not what it is not. But when you develop that, you are at super high risk of disastrous medical outcomes. And so if you're of Indian descent, you can be very slender and look very healthy, but have severe, very dangerous fatty liver disease and fatty pancreas disease. And I love that I'm doing this with you, because I feel like that is just not talked about in the Indian culture enough, that you don't have to be obese to be metabolically very, very unhealthy. But the beautiful thing about fatty pancreas and fatty liver is that you can reverse them completely within just a few weeks to a few months. It's simple. You don't even need to go see the doctor to reverse your fatty liver. All you need to do is eat a very low carbohydrate diet full of animal fats and animal protein, and plus or minus some vegetables and some berries. If you want to eat those, your fatty liver will be gone in a few weeks or a few months. And it's one of the easiest things to fix. But yet, if you listen to the experts in the field, they're doing research trying to find a pill that they can get a patent on, or an injection they can get a patent on. Nobody's interested in studying a low carbohydrate diet to reverse fatty liver because there's no money to be made there. But if you consider a low carbohydrate diet to be a proper human diet, which I do, then it makes perfect sense that eating a low carbohydrate diet would reverse fatty liver disease. And indeed it does.
What are your views on intermittent fasting?
I in no way think intermittent fasting is dangerous. I don't think it contributes to eating disorders. If we look at our ancestral behavior, we fasted very, very often in the past, right? Not out of choice like we do now, but we did it because there was just no food to eat. And so our body actually learned to use the period of fasting as a period that it can rejuvenate and rebuild and renew your tissues and organs and your cells. Even your mitochondria, when you're fasting, you'll replace your old worn out mitochondria with new, vigorous, vibrant mitochondria much faster during a period of fasting. And so this is very powerful, and it's a way that you can use this period of not eating to improve your health. There are experts out there that warn people not to intermittent fast because it might be in some way dangerous. But again, it would make as much sense if the experts came out and said, "Hey, you need to stop breathing because, we haven't really studied the long-term safety of breathing. We don't know for sure if it's safe or not. So until we study that, you better not do it." Human beings have been breathing for millions of years, and we've also been fasting for millions of years. Every major religion before it was modernized had an element of fasting as part of their religious practice. Every single one without exception. And so to try now to say, "Oh, we're not sure if intermittent fasting is safe or not," that's just silly. That doesn't make any sense ancestrally whatsoever. I'm a big proponent of intermittent fasting. And so every day I fast anywhere from 18 to 22 hours. And I'll eat either one meal or two meals within a 2 to 6 hour feasting window. And so it's very low carb, it's full of fatty meat, and I eat as much as I want. And I think that when you tell people, "Hey, if you'll do some intermittent fasting every day, even if it's just 14 hours a day or 16 hours a day, and then eat one or two or even three meals a day that are full of fatty animal foods and plus or minus some veg and berries, if you want that, you get to eat as much as you want. You get to eat until you're comfortably stuffed. You don't have to calorie count. You don't have to portion control. None of those things are necessary. And indeed, no other animal species does that. Every animal species on the planet, when they're eating their species appropriate diet, they eat until they can't eat another bite. And then they walk away. They never push back before they're full, as we're told to do every day. That's foolishness to say that you should have to do that to be healthy. To be healthy, you should eat nutrient-dense food that have been part of our diet for millions of years. You should eat until you're full, and then you should stop eating. It's just that simple. And many people, when they transition to a low-carbohydrate diet, they find that they start to intermittent fast unconsciously. They don't even notice that they're doing it. They'll just start skipping breakfast because they have so much energy and feel so good. They want to get their productive day started, and they're like, "I'm not hungry. I'm not going to eat." And that exactly mimics what we did for our entire time on this planet. I think it's very healthy, also helps you be more productive. And I think it leads to wonderful increases in the health span and the lifespan of the human species.
No, absolutely. And viewers, look, I don't think it's a positive bias or a coincidence that all 12 guests of this series of The Edge have all been proponents of intermittent fasting. You all know that I've been doing it for many months now, and the benefits that it's been in one's performance and well-being as well. Dr. Ken, we're approaching the end of the show, but before we get there, I'd love to hear from you what you're excited about and what you're particularly working on over the next couple of years in this field.
So I've got a 22-month-old little boy, Beckett. And so I've got a renewed sense of purpose and mission to live my healthiest life, to set the best example for him and my other 4 kids who are now grown. But having that little one watch everything you do really helps you to remember you're always setting an example for someone. Whether you know it or not, someone is always watching your example. And so I try to always lead by example in my life. And I think we should all try to do that. Currently, I'm putting the finishing touches on a book about lab tests that people need to get, starting at about the age of 30, 35, 40, to make sure that they're metabolically healthy. Because so many doctors and other healthcare providers out there, they don't even know what a C-peptide test is. They've never heard of a fasting insulin. They don't even know what those tests mean, much less how powerful they are. Most docs by this point have heard of the A1C, but many of them still don't check it routinely. And so putting out a book that helps just the layman understand these are the tests I need after the age of 30, 40, 50. So my co-author and I are finishing up that book. And then also I'm working on another book, and it's going to be called The Proper Human Diet, to kind of put in book form all of the things that I've learned through my 21 years of medical experience, practicing with patients, and also from my deep dives into the research behind not only human nutrition and human medicine, but archaeology, anthropology, and indeed paleoanthropology. It's what I'm really trying to do is synthesize the information gleaned from all these disciplines, which I think all of them are very important to the human journey, and for us to get useful nuggets of information for our personal journey. But the proper human diet is going to kind of be a distillation of everything I've learned from all those disciplines, and try to put that in the context of not a diet to prevent starvation, not a diet that you can just grab and go because you're rushed for time, but what diet is going to give me my optimal health? What diet is going to give you the best physical health and mental health? What diet is going to give you the longest health span and the longest lifespan? Because that's the diet we should all be trying to eat, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's so inspiring to have you on the show, Dr. Berry, because as a clinician, someone who is a proponent of nutrition and healing the body from the inside out, as opposed to how a lot of us were taught in med school, which is drug X, drug Y, drug Z. This is precisely the message that all young scientists, all young minds. I really appreciate you being with us. I can't wait to read your book on the metabolic panel and what people should be doing. I want to thank you for giving us your time today on The Edge.
It's such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in, and see you soon. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.